Alright, tonight we're going to be talking about using insects and how to do that to improve scientific literacy in a K-12 audience. So I'm going to go ahead and start this slideshow that we can see this a little bit better. Alright, so what is scientific literacy? So as scientific knowledge has continued to grow throughout the past couple of decades, the level of scientific understanding that the normal citizen has here in the United States has not kept up. And so we're talking about what they are being taught in K-12 settings, in your public schools and your private schools, anywhere from New York all the way to California. That is not kept up with what is being learned through primary research that is being done by scientists across the country and also across the world. And so scientific literacy, the actual definition of that, is the ability to read, interpret, and communicate science with the intent to use that knowledge to make decisions in one's everyday life. So that's someone that is out here that goes to the doctor and is being told, for example, that they have cancer and they want to research the type of cancer that they have, and being able to do that with the intent of being able to make decisions about their treatment. So if they're going to have radiation, if they're going to get chemotherapy, what is their prognosis? What is the, longevity for that person look like? And so how do we do that? How are we going to be able to battle this discrepancy between scientific literacy and the scientific knowledge that students are learning in a K-12 environment? And one of the ways that has came out in recent years is the utilization of organisms such as insects to be able to teach science and to be able to improve scientific literacy. And so here we have a little comic about bees in the classroom, and just the title, insects are the answer. And so why is that? Why are we saying that, using insects in the classroom might be a way to be able to teach science? And so one of the main ways is that there's an abundance of lessons and resources to teach using insects, and we'll go through some of those resources here in just a few moments. And entomology, or the study of insects, can be used to teach any biological concept. Genetics is a great example, using fruit flies in the classroom to show how traits are passed down through generations. Diversity, insects of course have huge diversity across the world. The importance of conservation, we see a lot in the news right now regarding monarch butterflies, as well as the plight of the honeybee and other bees here in North America, such as bumblebees, the rusty-patched bumblebee, that are on the endangered species list. And again, the diversity of insects is unmatched, and we'll look at that closely here in just a moment. And they make good captive subjects. And so, you can't really keep a lion in your classroom, and some other animals that are sometimes kept, such as birds like parakeets, for example, or other small parrots, they can be kept, but the cost of getting that animal is, large. The amount of room that's in a classroom can be, a difficult kind of thing to be able to mitigate. The cost of the upkeep of that animal, you're talking about food, does this cage need to be cleaned every single day? For example, with some animals, fish are very temperamental. And so insects make great captive subjects. Usually they are very cheap, and we'll go over where to get those insects. They can be easily kept. Small cages, you don't need a whole lot. You don't necessarily need to look at, how these insects or these animals can harm the students, because a lot of times, a lot of the insects that are being used, there's no issue as far as keeping them. You're not keeping anything that's going to be stinging or anything that really can bite or anything like that in the classroom. And so, again, the insects can make really good subjects to keep in the classroom, because they're easy to take care of, cheap to keep, and they're harmless. So weighing insects against other organisms, just a little brief pie graph here. We talked about the diversity of insects. Beetles make up the largest of the different families of insects, but you can see there that over 50% of the organisms, both vertebrate and invertebrate, on the planet are insects. In entomology, we used that key word just a moment ago, but that is just the study of insects. And here you have a couple of kids that are out catching insects in the wild, and that is something that is linked in the Google Drive account, is how to go about making insect collections. And that's actually a really great lesson, especially for some of your secondary education classes and your children that are, 6th grade and above. But these kids are having great fun, and that's something else that you can do is you can take your students out into nature and find insects and then talk about what jobs that those insects have in the environment. So it's not just bringing the insects into the classroom, but taking your students out to see insects at work as well. So what about insects? So how can we use them to connect students to science? The key thing that we must remember if we're going to use any organism or any kind of thinking outside of the box lesson plan is that it's got to be fun to keep the students' interest, but it has to be educational as well. If you're not tying in scientific concepts with using insects in the classroom, you're really not advancing scientific literacy. It just becomes another little assignment that the students are doing with no real concept as to how this fits into the real world. Most students do not have a firm grasp on entomological concepts, and in the Google Drive you will see both your pre-lesson and your post-lesson assessments. And so the idea is that once you kind of figure out what lesson that you're going to teach the students using insects, before you ever get into that lesson, you're testing the students on their pre-assignment knowledge, and it's just basic questions that you can use, and some of them can be tweaked just a little bit if you're doing this for second graders versus if you're teaching seniors in the high school. But just asking simple questions, how many segments are in an insect's body, how many pairs of legs do they have, name 5 different types of insects. And so again, you use that at the beginning, the pre-lesson assessment, and then once you do your lesson, then you can give them the post-lesson assessment and then see what they have learned. And the key driving home factor of, kind of why on the insect side would you want to do this, you're wanting to advance scientific literacy, but also teach students that insects aren't all bad. They're not all harmful. They're valuable to us both economically and environmentally. And so you can tie those concepts and those thought processes into the lesson plan as well. So not all bugs, in quotation marks, are scary. So all bugs are insects, but not all insects are bugs. When we think about bugs, we're thinking about cockroaches, that's, your beetles, but not all of them are actual bugs. You think about, for example, some of your isopods, so your roly-polies, your pill bugs, those don't necessarily fit into the loose little term bug, the common name bug, but they are insects. And so many harmless insects and arthropods can be used in the classroom to increase the scientific literacy. So common harmless insects or arthropods for the classroom. Pill bugs are a great example. Very tiny, need very little care, can be kept in petri dishes. Crickets, very cheap, easy to acquire. Fruit flies, you can teach a lot of genetics with the fruit flies. They do need just a little bit more work than some of your other common insects, but they're still another great example of insects to use in the classroom. Cockroaches, not necessarily talking about the household pest cockroach. I'm talking about your dubia roaches, your Madagascar hissing cockroaches, and those can usually be bought at specialty pet stores, and they are harmless as well. They're just larger. A lot of kids think that they're really cool because of what they look like. Ladybugs, another one that's pretty easy to acquire. And then of course butterflies. And butterflies, the main kind of drawback with them is that sometimes, if you're using them to teach about metamorphosis, then you have to think about the fact that if your students go home in the afternoon, sometimes the butterflies are going to hatch overnight. So they might not actually get to see the metamorphosis happening, or if they go and they're enclosed and then you have a break, if it happens over spring break and that's when they come out of the cocoon, that's something else as well to kind of keep into consideration. Also as well, a lot of butterflies, if you get outside of your painted ladies, they can be quite expensive to acquire, and so keep that in mind as well. So these are some pictures of the common classroom insects. So up here at the top, this is the hissing cockroach that we were talking about earlier. Just your common field cricket, painted lady butterfly, which is the most common butterfly that's used in a classroom environment. This is your fruit flies that we were talking about. And some of the really cool experiments that you can do with genetics is to end up with flightless fruit flies, or fruit flies that have wings that are deformed, and so that ends up being something that is passed down genetically. And also the color of the eyes, so whether they have white eyes or red eyes, for example. Then we have your pill bugs, or otherwise known as roly-polies, and then your ladybugs as well. So where can these insects be purchased? There will be a link in the Google Drive. There will be a document, and that's going to take you to a list. So this is not all inclusive, but a list of different places that you can purchase insects. Walmart, you can buy crickets there. Petco will also have crickets. They will have hornworms, oftentimes mealworms, for example. So anything that usually is sold as food for reptiles. Some fruit flies, dependent on the store. Flukers is another one that sells crickets, your mealworms. Insect Lore, you can actually get butterflies from them. I do believe they also sell spiders as well, which of course aren't necessarily insects, but they are invertebrates. And also maybe even mantids, if I'm not mistaken. Carolina Biological Supply, you can get a pretty good diversity of insects that can be purchased there. Other places that are not listed would be your local pet store. You would be surprised at what you can find inside of there. And then also local bait stores as well. So if you have a, tackle shop somewhere near, if you live near a lake, for example, you might go in there and check and see what they have to offer. So once you get your insects, I would highly suggest that you use the web, the internet, to be able to find lesson plans. I have linked some lesson plans in the Google Drive, but this is not an all-inclusive list. If you find different colleges that have departments of entomology, or they have at least degrees in entomology, a lot of times students will be creating lesson plans as part of their coursework, or they'll even just have information about different insect species. And so if you can find those colleges, I highly suggest that you bookmark those websites, because they oftentimes will have outreach programs or have IPM, integrated pest management sheets, and so that information can be used to help kind of build your lesson plan. Other websites that are here, Monarch Watch is a wonderful resource for any and all information about monarch butterflies. So if you wanted to, for example, create a monarch way station at your school, that'd be a great place to start. Butterbike, I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but Butterbike, if you take a look at their website, there was a woman who biked the monarch route. So started in Mexico, went up to Canada, and then came back down on her bicycle. And so she went through and did talks at different schools. I was lucky enough to get to meet her in person, and she did a talk at a school in Tulsa that I was doing an environmental education program at. But you can go through and you can read about her travels. You can read about the plight of the monarch. The American Beekeeping Federation, there's a couple of different beekeeping sites that you can look up to kind of get information about what bees are in the endangered species list, and they'll have lesson plans and little experiments. And some schools will allow you to keep an observational beehive, and if your school allows that, that is wonderful. And I do highly suggest that you get in touch with a local beekeeper, even if you can't keep a hive there at your school, to have them bring in an observation hive that would be enclosed, where the students can just see the bees at work inside of the hive. Bug Guide is another great resource as far as looking up information about different insect species. And then pollinator.org, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's got information about any and all insects that are pollinators. So everything from your bees to some of your moths, to your wasps, some of your beetles, all of them are included on that website. And over here, this is Sarah, the woman that I was talking about, that butterbiked. That's her giving a talk at one of the schools. So this is a list of helpful resources. So definitely check out the Google Drive that accompanies this video. Read through some of your primary research articles that talk about how people are using insects in a classroom. And I did link some of those. I have copies of some of those in the Google Drive. However, again, it's not an exhaustive list. Please get on Google Scholar, do an internet search, and keep seeing, because there's going to be more and more resources that are listed out there. Identification guides. I know that some of the different websites, such as Acorn Naturalist, which is a website that you can buy supplies from, they give out grants for teachers to be able to purchase identification guides to go in their classroom. And of course, with ID guides, if you're going out and you're going to be doing any type of field trip, that would be a great resource to have for the students if they're catching, you know, butterflies in their nets, to be able to look and see what they've caught. Outreach programs of local universities, I mentioned that just a moment ago. Sometimes you'll get a professor or even students that will bring insects that they keep in their labs out to your classroom. Your local friendly entomologist, if you know of somebody that is an entomologist, have them come out and talk to your students. Books in print, I've got a couple of examples here. These are several books that I use in the classroom, or I've used in environmental education programs. These are all found, do believe, through Acorn Naturalist still. If you can't find them there, you might be able to find them on Amazon.com. Educator curriculum. So some of the curriculum I'll have listed in the Google Drive with links. But again, search the internet. There's always new stuff being put out there. And then online retailers, and those are listed in the additional resources and where to buy supplies Word document that is listed in the Google Drive. Don't forget to browse the Google Drive resources. There is a ton of information that I've put in there. I'm going to try to keep that updated. Inside of the Google Drive, there's also an after action review for teachers. So that is for you, that if you use any of your lesson plans that are in there, if you come up with your own lesson plan, please feel free to add that. But get in there and take a look at what all is in there. And then if you do use a lesson plan, the after action review is basically more for you than for anybody else. It gives you a place to keep track of your pre and post lesson assessments that the students do, because you'll have them do a post lesson assessment after they get done with a lesson plan. There will also be a place in there for you to write notes about how much it costs to do that lesson. If you're keeping insects in the classroom and you're having students, you know, detail or observe what they're doing, you know, how long it takes for a butterfly to go through metamorphosis, you know, then you can list that information. The same thing if you're doing certain lessons, you know, how long did it take for you to do a lesson, and any notes that you need to write down to say, okay, well, I need to get this prepped and it's going to take me 2 hours to prep this lesson. But that kind of thing, for example. But please check out the Google Drive. Let me know if you have any suggestions. So in summary, use entomology in your science classrooms liberally. Keep insects in the classroom. Use the resources that are in the Google Drive and elsewhere. And don't be afraid to ask for help from either me or anybody else that can help you. And here's just a list of references that I used to put together this video. And again, there's way more references in the Google Drive. And I hope that the Google Drive helps you in using insects to teach scientific literacy.